I'm Phakiti. Today I had a conversation with Ken Cruickshank. Ken is a professor in teaching English to speakers of other languages in the Sydney School of Education and Social Work at the University of Sydney. Ken is also the director of the Sydney Institute for Community Language Education at the University of Sydney. Today I asked him several questions. For example, his interest in TESOL and TESOL research, his current research projects, as well as his advice for high research degree students in TESOL, postgraduate students in TESOL, and teachers of English. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Thank you, Ken. So I have some questions that I would like to ask you. So the very first question is, what actually attracted you to become a TESOL person or to choose a career in TESOL?
I think it was even before I went to university, I did a lot of traveling and in places where English wasn't the main language. So I went through the experience of learning French and Italian as a second language speaker, and I realized how hard it was. So when I went to uni, I was interested in languages, and then when I got into teacher training, I chose TESOL because I think I understood how difficult it was to learn a second language and just what it meant in terms of the way you see yourself. So that was always my interest.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So so now tell us a little bit more about your teaching experiences in this sort of area.
I've been teaching TESOL for 50 years or more, and I like it because it's so rewarding. It's better than other areas. You know when you succeed, when the students learn. I learn as much about them as they do about English. So I learn about different cultures, different backgrounds, and I learn as much as they do, I think. And it's just rewarding. You know that yourself.
You mentioned rewarding. Like, in what way do you feel like it's rewarding? In terms of solving some problems or improving.
It's two
lives.
things. The lecturer I learned from, she saw teaching as problem solving. And she said, if I can manage to know how to get something across like you do in your teaching, how can I get across the ideas? How can I get across the concepts? And that's always a challenge. Rewarding because the students are usually so interested in learning, and you can tell when you succeed. That's what's good about it.
Okay, yeah, that's very nice,
Well, you're the same, aren't you?
reassuring. What we have to do in this career.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, can you actually now tell me your current research project or what you do currently? Because I know I looked up your profile, and then you mentioned community languages, TESOL areas, and so on.
I could choose community languages. I'll choose TESOL first because what I'm doing at the moment is looking at the teaching of English through science. And a lot of the traditional stuff separates language from science. So it talks about the genres of science, or it talks about the vocabulary and the grammar. But what I wanted to start with was looking at what science is, what science learning is, and therefore what language fits into it. So it started, this will take a while, but it started with me sitting down with other science lecturers, looking at what do we have in common? How do I understand science? What are the key concepts? What's the normal pedagogy? And what aligns with TESOL? And then we started working with science teachers in schools, and it was interesting because for science teachers, often they realized that science is a second language for them.
Right.
They had to learn it that way. And I found some interesting things, so that in the science curriculum, it's very applied research. They start very much with the idea of everyday problems, then getting into scientific knowledge, and then translating that into some sort of presentation or solution for an everyday issue. And this aligned with TESOL pedagogy. So a lot of task-based learning is very much not looking just at the language, but in doing something with that and the language involved in it. So with this behind us, we started working with 10 different schools. We got the science teachers, EAL teachers working together in Sydney, yes. Lower SES schools with very low outcomes. And we got the science teachers in working with ESL teachers. How would you, what are the problems? What are the issues? What can be a task-based outcome? At one of the schools, they chose the functions of parts of the body. And a lot of these children, they interpreted for their parents with doctors. And so we got those students to be doctors themselves, and they had to work out how they would explain and give advice about different illnesses and what was wrong. And it was interesting because first of all, it started with a real life problem, and it ended up with an outcome, which was them role playing as doctors. But along the way, we had to teach all the formal language.
Right.
Now, for these kids, they didn't like formal English. But when they put on the doctor's coats, they were playing a role, and they used that language. You know? So I'll get to the point in a minute. At another school, it was getting the students to look at problems with iPhones. And the actual science concept was the properties of metals. And they had to look at why this phone was overheating to do all sorts of scientific experiments and then give their presentation to the board of directors. So again, informal English.
Right.
So there was a lot of literacy involved, but the outcome was actually a spoken language one. The kids did all the science experiments. And what we drew from that is that when you are looking at language-based teaching in the science, you need to look at the cognitive outcomes, the integrity of that subject area, and then everything follows from it. And we found also that when the science and the ESL teachers worked together, team teaching worked. They got on and they ended up, the ESL teachers ended up talking like science teachers. The science teachers were using the words like lexical density, scaffolding, all of the stuff.
Jargons.
Yes. So they learned from each other, and it came about because we started from the subject itself, not from an abstract view of language. Taking the most recent research into TESOL and looking at what it means in terms of content area teaching, and often the subjects, they're following the same research directions. But the takeaway message is that as a TESOL teacher, you cannot work in a subject area unless you know the concepts of that subject and the approaches to it. You know?
And again, like you probably realize that, you know, what you do actually is of interest to a lot of people in the area of English medium instruction, for example, when you know the focus is on the content, and the language is part of it, and you know they sort of integrate it that way.
I think it's really important. Usually, I think there's been too much of a split between what was traditionally TEFL and TESOL. I think there is now so much overlap between them. And one of the problems is that I think in EMI, sometimes the focus is too much on sort of simplifying the content, whereas in actual fact, you need to look at the validity, the strength of the concept, but to look at the language that's possible from it, you know? And I think outcomes task-based is the best way to do it.
Oh, okay. Thank you for a very interesting introduction to that. But before I talk more about, you know, ask you more about your community language sort of project or, you know, aspects of your profession. How long have you been working on this project?
This project, it started with an ARC about 2007. This project itself started in 2016, and we've been working on it for about 5-6 years.
Wow, so it's a long-term, longitudinal kind
of... It's the biggest challenge, I think, in TESOL, because in Australia, the students do not have time to learn language by itself. They are in mainstream classes and they've got to learn language through the content area. No choice about it.
So you managed to track students over different years?
Yes.
And have you noticed any changes in students' learning or capacity?
The schools where we chose the students, they were the lowest stream class in science, and they're performing at or above the best.
Oh, that's amazing.
We have the data to show it. But most interesting is that the science teachers themselves, all the results came back positive in terms of what they felt about themselves. And many of them have gone on to become TESOL teachers themselves.
Okay, wow. So it's not just the students, it's
No.
also the teachers
Yeah.
that will benefit from
Yeah.
that have benefited
I think
from
so.
this.
Subject area teachers, once they learn about TESOL, they realize how important it is because it's not just separating the TESOL students, it's actually teaching all of their students successfully. And native speakers of English benefit from these approaches.
That's very inspirational.
Yeah.
Now, can you tell us more about the language community
Okay.
teaching and what drove your motives to initiate doing this?
We've been lucky to receive government funding that started 6 years ago. In Australia, there are something like 150,000 children learning their home language. 7,000 volunteer teachers. But in every country of the world, they exist. Every country where there's been migration, we estimate something like 2.5 million students learning in these out-of-hours schools. So in Australia, it's something like 72 languages being taught. We were funded by the government to develop research, to get resources for the teachers, and to provide pathways for the teachers for them to get accreditation in Australia as teachers. So that's what we've been doing, and that's what I've been taken up with for the last 6 years. That's why I haven't published enough on the TESOL project.
Right. Okay. So I know it's because you have the institute, right?
Yes.
That you set up. Can you tell us more about what's happening? The people who work for you.
We have about 75 part-time lecturers, researchers, and we have a staff of 4 full-time. What we've done is that we now have a pathway for migrant professionals to become teachers in Australia. We help them get their qualifications from overseas accredited. We have a preparation course for them, and they go on to do a Master of Teaching. We've had 70 so far, and with the shortage of teachers, we're going to get about another 200 through in the next year as teachers in mainstream schools. We also have resources for teaching the languages, so you can look at our online portal, www.openlanguage.org.au. We have some 3,000 resources up there now in many languages. Teachers can download them. We've had over 100,000 hits.
Wow.
Not just from Australia, but from Asia, North America. And it's up-to-date, evidence-based resources that are there. And the third thing is the research into the schools themselves. We've looked at the teachers, their needs. We've looked at the organisation and the teaching in the schools. And we're trying to improve that, bring it more in line. Because the teachers are usually parents, volunteer parents, who start working in the schools. And that's what we've been working on.
I know you have supervised a lot of PhD students and to succeed, and a lot of them became, academics and so on in our field, and teachers and so on. Maybe if you could give us some advice, for students so that they can be motivated, in terms of their study and so on. Any advice
I
that
think
you like
students
to give?
come into PhDs with very different motivations. Some do it because they want to get a job in a uni. Others do it because they're not sure what they want to do. Others are interested in getting the qualification. Some are interested in going further in study. But if they can get through the first year and gain some confidence, when they start collecting their data, it's when they actually look at their data and think, wow, this is what I'm finding. I think it's when they develop that sense of, this is really interesting. I want to find, what do I want to know that I didn't know before? Once they get that motivation, they will keep going. I guess it's hard In the students we supervise, and I know you do the same, we try and get the students to work together to support each other. Sydney Uni is very good that way, in that way, because you know and I know that doing a PhD can be really lonely. I think having peer support and sharing ideas with others, being able to talk about what you do, is really good for motivation. It's hard keeping your motivation up. Often I advise students not to suspend because it's so easy to lose it. If they switch, say, from full-time to part-time, that's often better because it's hard juggling life, juggling family, juggling work.
And unexpected situations.
Exactly.
So on.
Yeah. This is not really a direct answer. It's not a simple thing of keeping up motivation. The ones who finish are usually the ones who are most directed, but your motivation changes along the way. I think if you can you know that you're going to finish when you start telling a friend about what you're doing and they fall asleep.
Oh, okay.
Because you're so excited yourself.
Right.
But you realize that it's here. You haven't sort of told other people. I tell my students, talk to your dog, talk to your cat, talk to your partners or friends. Just tell them about it, because once you are clear about what you're doing, that's where your motivation comes from.
Okay, one other thing in relation to, say, students, in my experience as well, is they have a lot of ideas, they have a lot of data, and often, it would mean extra time to complete. What would be your advice on having a lot of data to be worked?
Two things. It's our job as supervisors to say, too much, cut down. That's your scope. And you've got to imagine it as a race, maybe a 1 kilometre race. Once you're over the line, you're finished. You don't have to use your data. Let go of some of it because you can look at it later. You have to realise when your supervisor says, this is enough, this is all you need to get the doctorate, stop, because you're going to kill yourself. There's a limit, and really, getting a PhD is joining the club of researchers. And once you can prove that you've got good methodology, that you can collect the data and do the findings, you do not have to analyze everything that you've collected. It's really just getting over the line to show that you're good enough. Then your career starts. You look at all of that and you develop further. It's just a line in your trajectory. Yeah?
Absolutely, I agree totally.
Yeah.
Still quite a challenge, right? I mean,
Well-
you have done it, we have done it, but for students, often they don't realize that.
I know, it's hard to let go. I did it with my own supervisor. He kept pulling it, saying, put it in. And I kept saying, no, I've got to finish. But I was wrong.
Right.
You've got to let go of it and look at it later. Well, it's a challenge that we have as supervisors. It's really hard to say, stop, because you can see that the researchers, the students, are so wedded and enthralled in what they're doing. And you say, look, get your PhD, then you can go back.
That's right. That's good advice. Okay, and I have probably one final question for you, really, as we want to focus on language teachers, students, master students doing coursework in TESOL area. What would you advise them in relation to their future career and what they should be looking out for?
It's interesting because when you work with older teachers, I'm old now, but you see some are still enthusiastic and others are not. The enthusiastic ones keep learning. And it's when they try out things and keep reading, but also learning from others. So as a teacher, it's the job where you learn as much from the students and what you do as you give. So I think as a TESOL teacher, it's interesting. Some teachers go straight into admin, but I notice that TESOL teachers, they often shift from job to different situations because they keep learning.
It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you today. I have learned a lot about your current project and your advice for teachers and for students are definitely invaluable for our journal. Thank you, Ken. Thank you.